Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Emmett Pierce. The Ukraine War news update, second part thereof. War did do a breaking news piece this morning. I'm going to go over that very quickly again, what I said this morning. Anyway, for the 23rd of April 2024. We are going to start with the UK aid that I've already told you about, but I'm going to add a little bit to this in terms of a sort of criticism that was given to me, or a comment that I want to answer, not criticism to me. I mean, I've not given this aid. Right, okay, so what's happened? Well, I believe it's St. George's Day. If it's St. George's Day, that's like the English National Day. So this could be why it's been announced today, you know, because we must all remember that mythical Turkish George that is obviously very English. Anyway, I digress. So we have just announced, or the UK's just announced its biggest ever single biggest ever military aid package. That includes quite a lot of stuff. It's about $617 million worth of stuff. That includes, right, so we have Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which is massively significant. They absolutely desperately need that. I personally think that's the most important thing on there, although there's some really much needed vehicles, but those vehicles could be given by other nations, and we could give even more Storm Shadows. For me, it's about Storm Shadows and strike and air defense missiles. So things like Martlet, Starstreak, these sort of man-held, man-portable air defense systems, man-pads, that you can hold on your shoulder, but also you can set on tripods. And in fact, the Starstreak has the ability to have like 3 of those tubes on a tripod. You can put that on the back of a vehicle, all sorts of stuff like that. Missiles, air defense, I presume strike and air defense missiles will probably include things like the actual tubes and launchers for those missiles, but also the ASRAMs that have been adapted to fire from the back of this Super Cat chassis that we've given a few to Ukraine. These are air-to-air missiles that are used in the surface-to-air mode. So yeah, lots of interesting things, including these vehicles. So 60 boats, including offshore raiding craft and rigid raiding craft and dive boats, as well as maritime guns. 400 vehicles, including 160 Husky MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. That's the vehicle on the screen at the moment. 162 armoured vehicles and 78 all-terrain vehicles, and nearly 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition. So these are possibly, as is mentioned here, a combination of, say, the Husky. Then we've got the tracked, articulated Warthog vehicle there, the all-terrain carrier that can be used in different ways, sort of ambulance or supplies or whatever. And then we have possibly the F100 series of vehicles and the F430 series. So there are lots of different types of F100s, Scimitar, Samson, that kind of infantry fighting vehicles, or light tanks, sometimes called Samaritan ambulance vehicles. So it could be an ambulance variety thrown in there, Spartan, Striker, or Scorpion, which has the record for the fastest Scarecoats tank at, I believe, 81 kilometers an hour. So there you go, 82.23 kilometers an hour, 51.1 miles an hour. So stuff like that's going. I don't know exactly which variant of these, and also F430 series might be a vehicle that is going as well. We have phased out a number of these vehicles and are phasing them out. I think this one was phased out in 2022, was it? This one, or no, it might be the Husky actually was phased out in 2022. So, you know, we have a number of vehicles that are due to be replaced, and it's a prime time to send these things. So it's really good news, fantastic. In fact, Volodymyr Zelensky said, I spoke with Rishi Sunak, who's visiting in Poland at the moment, who informed me that the UK has allocated the largest defence support package for Ukraine to date, worth £500 million. Storm Shadow and other missiles, hundreds of armoured vehicles and watercraft ammunition, all of this needed on the battlefield. I'm grateful to the UK and personally to Prime Minister Sunak for such a strong demonstration of support for and for the willingness to further develop our defence cooperation, especially with the emphasis on maritime and long-range capabilities. We discussed the need for an effective model for confiscating frozen Russian assets. We also shared our expectations for the upcoming Peace Summit in Switzerland and European Political Community Summit in the UK. Right. So, again, just to reiterate, Storm Shadow missiles in that. That's super important. Right, someone has said this, so I thank you very much. It's a good question. So Orig Prankster says, hey Jonathan, I do congratulate the UK for the donation of 500 million quid to the Ukraine campaign, although, so it's like, this is good. I'm not saying it's not good. This is awesome. This is a good question, but I am actually going to give you the comeback to this. The US did agree to send $61 billion. I understand there's a view that the pound is strong, but not that strong. Good gag. Why is the UK sending pence when the US is sending dollars? Right. It's easy to think that, but actually it's not true. Okay, let's try and work this out. So it's not just we've only given 500 or $617 million. It's that actually we've given now over £9 billion, which would be, I don't know, in the teens billion of dollars. And then you look at what the US has given. Now, we're not going to include the $60 billion for the time being. It's just we'll factor that in later. But up till now, because we have given that and the US hasn't yet sanctioned that. So we need to think how big our population is compared to the US population. And our population is a fifth the size of the American population. So that's pretty important. So we're giving £500 million or $670 million. Right, okay, so we would need to at least times that by 5 if we're just talking population. But if you're talking in terms of GDP, which is kind of how rich we are, I know it's a bit of a shortcut and there are lots of caveats applied to that, but let's just go with it. They've got about $21 trillion GDP and we've got a $3 trillion, which means we're a seventh of the size, economically speaking, of the US. So if you're talking about how deep your pockets are, and that's not to talk about the size of their armed forces as well and the amount of kit they just got sitting around in warehouses, we could even like multiply that far more than that because they've got like 6,000 Bradleys or Abrams or whatever of each of those, like thousands of each of those things, and we've got like 200. Now you can say that we haven't spent enough on our armed forces, but then that's not part of our entire economic, military, foreign political strategy where it is part of the US's. So there's so many moving parts here. But the point is that if you are working out what we have spent and whether we're only spending pence and they're spending dollars, you need to multiply what we have given by either 5 or 7 times for it to be comparable to the US. You are comparing apples and bricks. Okay, if you are just going to look at the real term donations, right? Then let's look at that. Then so military aid. So bear in mind, $60 billion has not been given yet, and I'm also going to have a look at that in a little bit more depth. So the Americans have given to date $42.2 billion of military aid. I'm just looking at military aid. Now, as far as military aid is concerned, we have given, now that's going to be about $10 billion. So we have given a quarter of what the US has given. So actually up to now, that should be multiplied by 5 or 7 to get comparable. If you multiplied 10 by 5, you get 50 billion or 70 billion. So we have done better than the US to date in terms of just military kit. Right, and I think the UK needs to do way more. So I will be equally critical, but it's worth looking at these stats in a much more. Well, it's not that much more nuanced. You've got to be able to compare the data, and you can't compare a country of 350 million people to a country of 70 million people and say you should be given the same as we're giving. Like, hang on, how does that work? Otherwise, Estonia should be given the same. So we need to look at really as a percentage of GDP. And of course, when you look at as a percentage of GDP, now this is all aid, though, not just military. So one must remember that, because I was just looking at military. So we need to be honest and transparent about how we're looking at the data. This is all data, bilateral aid, and then EU thrown in. So Estonia, for example, have given 4.1% of GDP. To date. Actually, I say to date, this is back in January. So this is something like coming up for, this is, 3 months. This is over 3 months out of date now. And this has changed an awful lot. The US hasn't given any more really since January, and then other countries have. So this will change. The UK has given 0.5% of GDP. So I think that is not enough. But the US has given 0.31% of GDP. Now, that's all aid, and the US has given like a load of aid, right? But again, it's understanding that EU and EU institutions have given more than the US. And actually, now you're to the point where they've given something like $100 billion worth more of aid, just all aid, than the US. Okay. Now, we can talk about sanctions and talk about all the other work that the US is doing and the UK and other nations. So it gets complicated. But hopefully you get the idea that, okay, it's more complicated than just comparing the two numbers of the two nations in real terms, military aid. But then when you add the $60 billion on, that $60 billion is not military aid. In fact, realistically, not that much of it is. If you break it down, I think you've got $7.8 billion worth of presidential drawdown. Now, that is your key stuff, because that's the stuff that they can take from their stocks and give to Ukraine as $7.8 billion worth of stuff. So you need to add that on. Then you would add on the USAI, which is the amount that they can order off the US or from defense companies and then get sent to Ukraine. But a lot of that is replenishment funding. It's other sorts of funding that isn't necessarily direct aid to Ukraine. And so it depends how you slice and dice even the $60 billion, because that is not $60 billion worth of aid. And so therefore, if you're going to compare $60 billion here to 500 million quid or $617 million, that is an unfair comparison, because actually you would need to then add on everything the UK has done in terms of aiding, because part of that aid is sustaining the Ukrainian government, there's humanitarian aspects and so on and so forth. You would need to add all our stuff together. So then it gets back to really looking at total aid packages. And this is where you look at EU countries and EU institutions, 144 billion, and that's now gone up. 3 months of that going up for EU by massive amounts and not going up for the United States. That will include the $50 billion. Okay, it's across euros, 50 billion euros across 5 years, but you can shove that on for a start, I would have thought. And then all the other bilateral and EU organisational contributions as well. And so I'm not trying to denigrate the US, but I am trying to be accurate here. Basically, I'm saying, awesome, everyone, let's do more, everyone, right? But let it be known that the EU is ahead of the US. Now, we then need to look at, okay, what's the population size of the EU? Population of the EU is higher than the US, but it used to be 500 million, but that was with us, so I presume it's now like 430 million. Its economy, though, because you've got very poor nations in the EU and rich nations, and none of the nations are as rich as the US. So the GDP of the EU will be less, I think, than the US. So the fact that it has given $100 billion more of equipment there or thereabouts is really significant. So even if you add the US $60 billion of aid onto what they have there, you are still less than the EU. And obviously that's not the UK, and this guy was talking about UK, but you get the idea that we need to be nuanced, and it's not so easy as to say, well, that's rubbish, you need to be doing more. I will say we need to be doing more. I'm the first to criticise the UK. In fact, I get criticised for criticising the UK too much and not being patriotic enough by other British people, but there you go. Hey ho. Anyway, moving on. So from Kiev, the US Congressman here, Representative Keating, says that the speed of which we'll see weapons in Ukraine is about to make your head spin. Let's actually listen to him. So there was a bipartisan group of representatives over in Kiev, went straight over, I presume, after voting at the weekend to Kiev, and here they are speaking.
The answer to your question in terms of timing is sooner than anyone thinks is possible. The arms that will get here quicker than I think any military could ever mobilize to get them here. Some of them might be in days, some of them might be in weeks. We don't know the schedule, and even if we did, we wouldn't tell anyone because it could affect the strategy in the war. But the fact is, people should be confident that there's no stone left unturned in terms of getting them here quickly.
That's really, really good news. Sorry, the volume probably wasn't good enough for that, but it is like quicker than you'll ever see any other aid get anywhere. Like this is going to get to Ukraine seriously quickly. And that's coming from someone, I presume, in the know. Really good news. In fact, there is now imagery coming out of Poland of a bunch of Bradleys sitting, waiting to go on articulated on trailers, ready to go to Ukraine. So it is going to get there pretty soon, one would presume. And then there's this scoop that the Biden administration is preparing a larger than normal package of military aid for Ukraine that would include armored vehicles, in addition to urgently needed artillery and air defenses, according to two US officials. The DoD, Department of Defense, expects to move the package quickly as soon as Biden signs an expected bill providing $60 billion in new aid to Ukraine. And this, I thought, was particularly poignant. It's important to see this. So the New York Post is a tabloid newspaper that normally aligns itself very much with the Republicans. And if you remember, it had a front page of Moscow Marjorie, Niet Moscow Marjorie, and her in one of the Russian hats. And it was taking the side of Mike Johnson and moderate Republicans against Moscow Marjorie. That is positioning that I think is vital. Like, we don't need to know what, Occupy Democrats are saying. Oh, no, actually, it's probably the wrong choice there. MSNBC or CNN, they are going to be moderate and on the side of either Democrat leaning or on the side of doing pretty much the obvious right thing to do, I would say. We want to go to news outlets like this who have purchase in the minds of Republicans, who are the people who need to be brought back into the fold of responsible foreign diplomacy, rather than doing exactly what Putin would want. So this is super important. New York Post headline: "Okay, Biden, you have your aid bill. Now stop being intimidated by Russia and give Ukraine the weapons it needs." Not only is it pro-Ukraine, as in, just mildly, oh yeah, well done, we've got that through, that's really good for Ukraine. It's saying, that's good. Now you got to do better. You've got to ramp this up and give them the right things, not just the right amount of money, but the right things. This is really good messaging. I'm going to dip into it. So it talks about House vote. Talks about Winston Churchill saying that one can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else, which is always funny, but it's certainly true in this case. And then it says, well, the US needed to act with more urgency to deter all its adversaries around the world. Interesting. It was arguably in Ukraine that protracted congressional inaction has had the most severe consequences. Really good rhetoric. As Ukraine's anti-air capabilities are being depleted, Russians are killing scores of civilians in their attacks on cities and non-military infrastructure. Really good rhetoric. As in, it's talking not just about a military confrontation here, but what the Russians are doing to destroy civilian infrastructure. Slowly but surely, it says, Russian forces are making advances on the battlefield, which raises the risk of a partial collapse of Ukrainian defences. And then later, with US assistance back in the game, I love that kind of rhetoric, it is not yet too late to turn the tide. It's very like, hey. That said, the aid is necessary but not sufficient condition. Oh, bit of philosophy there, Inus conditioning. Anyway, J.L. Mackie, the philosopher, would talk about necessary but insufficient. That said, the aid is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for Ukraine's victory. What is needed, as well as a change of strategy on the part of the Biden administration. For one, it is clear that, quote, for as long as it takes is no longer a viable or credible approach towards underwriting Ukrainian efforts. Really important. They need victory. This is all the kind of rhetoric we expect from massively overt Ukrainian supporters like myself, and yet here it is in a media source that we wouldn't otherwise expect it. Moreover, Ukraine's losses on the battlefield as DC dithered should have shown the White House that its current levels of ambition and strategic clarity do not rise to the occasion. True, it has been the self-deterrence of the administration and fears of Russian escalation that have both restricted Ukraine's freedom of action and eroded the political case for helping Ukraine at home. Of course, we must defer to the Ukrainians in their decisions to strike logistics and energy infrastructure on Russia's territory. So it's also saying they should be able to hit, presumably with American weapons, Russian oil refineries, etc., etc. Brilliant. Kiev has no offensive ambitions toward Russia. It is merely seeking to reconstitute its territory as recognised by a plethora of international institutions and norms. As President Biden signs a bill into law, he needs to address the American people and explain that Ukraine's final victory looks and why it matters to the US. What it looks like. But he must also urge his Secretary of Defense and his national security team to shed their fear of Russian response to our assistance to the Ukrainians. Let's not be anti-escalatory. Let's not be scared of the Russian nuclear saber rattling. This is brilliant stuff. While it is imperative to get, in particular, air defences and ammunition to Ukraine as fast as possible, the supplemental cannot provide an excuse for Biden to return to business as usual, as seen over the past 2 years. Yes, yes, yes. Ukrainians need their own air power as well as high-precision, long-range artillery. Yes, yes, yes. And they must be allowed to do both without strings attached in order to make Russia's control over occupied territories untenable. Absolutely. Make no mistake, the closer Ukraine gets to liberation of Crimea, a goal that is not as far-fetched as naysayers make it appear, Kremlin's unhinged mouthpieces will escalate the nuclear bluster. Yes, this is so on point. Unlike in the past, the Biden team must respond with equanimity and urge peaceniks in European capitals such as Berlin or Budapest to grow a spine. As members of Congress from both political parties noted with eloquence in the floor debate on Saturday, excellent, bipartisan, people saying the right thing in a bipartisan fashion. This is not merely a fight over Ukraine's territory. This is a fight for the survival and security of the West, in which we cannot be intimidated by a Tin Pot dictator. This is brilliant. Now, what's interesting also about who wrote this is he's a person from, so this is Dadabor Rohak from the American Enterprise Institute. Now, this is a right-wing free market think tank that I would otherwise vehemently disagree with. They are anti-climate change science. They've buried climate evidence over a long period. They've done all sorts of things I vehemently disagree with. But where they do all the same things as a Heritage Foundation, when it comes to the Ukraine war, they have been absolutely on the side of sense and sensible American foreign diplomacy, and with Ukraine against Russia since the beginning of the war, the AEI, where the Heritage Foundation has not. And I've talked before about you can track the money from Russia through Hungary to the Heritage Foundation via Tucker Carlson and his father, etc., etc. The Heritage Foundation is fundamentally compromised. The AEI is an ideological think tank that I disagree with, but it is absolutely on point with the Ukraine war. And it has been consistently on point since the beginning of the war. So credit where credit is due. That is good news. And this is a great article. I really, really do appreciate seeing that in the New York Post. Right. Anton Gerashchenko says agreements have been reached regarding ATACMS, according to President Zelensky. The president said there are 4 priorities for Ukraine in terms of US aid today: protecting the sky, modern artillery, long-rangeness, and speedy arrival of aid packages. Well, you will get speedy arrival, and I think you're going to get ATACMS. I think the US are going to push a boat out. I think you're going to get artillery and artillery ammunition and air defences. We'll talk about Patriot going forward, but he said, like in his words, Zelensky's words, and today's result, all the I's have been dotted in the agreements regarding ATACMS. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Congress. So ATACMS look to be on the cards, very much so. Ukraine is negotiating to receive 4 batteries of Patriot air defense systems, according to Foreign Minister Kuleba. That is negotiating doesn't mean they're going to get them. Quote, we have 4 specific Patriot batteries on our radar. Negotiations are underway between us, the relevant countries, and the United States, the minister said. Now, does that mean the US in terms of a battery there or 2? Or does that mean in terms of manufacturing? The German federal government is pushing the US to deliver at least 1 more Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. Germany will also keep pressing European allies this week, including France and Italy, to assess what they're able to deliver. So you've got SAMP-T in the mix possibly as well, the Patriot equivalent that is made by those 2 countries. Right, Sweden's defense minister doesn't rule out sending Patriots to Ukraine. Paul Jonsson does not rule out sending them, according to the Guardian newspaper. So Could be good news, could be Sweden involved there. And actually, the Swedish defence minister said that his country is ready to join a German initiative to strengthen the defence of Ukrainian skies. Sweden is currently considering the possibility of financing the purchase of air defence systems and can transfer RBS-70 systems. So these are other sort of man-pads or similar. Like I was talking about with let's say the Starstreak, you can load them on bigger tripods, possibly have them on your shoulder as well. I don't know about the RBS-70. Increased competition amongst component sources are critical to achieving substantial all-up-round cost reduction, says John Ridge. What's he talking about? Well, you're starting to see a lot of talk about countries having potentially the ability to manufacture components of Patriot systems under license. We've heard about the potential for that in Norway with Kongsberg. That is as a result of them possibly buying a whole battery, the Norwegians, with a view to doing that. And now here we got Lockheed Martin has signed a memorandum of understanding with Spanish company Grupo Oasia to enable licensed production of certain components for the PAC-3 MSE missile. Such agreements are key to expanding production capacity and reducing costs. So the missiles are really expensive, and there will be a bottleneck because they need an absolute ton of them all around the world. People need them. They've been giving a load to Ukraine. Is there a capacity to build those with just what Lockheed Martin has wherever it builds them? So the fact that certain components can be made in Spain is really good news. And also, if it's competition, right? If lots of different concerns can make similar parts or the same parts for these missiles or for the system, then you will get competition, and hopefully that will drive down the prices of those components. Right. A number of EU countries have expressed their readiness to supply air defence systems and ammunition to Ukraine in the near future, said Joseph Borrell of the EU. Deliveries of artillery ammunition purchased as part of the Czech initiative will also begin at the end of May or the beginning of June. So that's good news. So here says again, no reports, first deliveries of artillery shells will take place at the end of May, beginning of June. That's clarified by Joseph Borrell. More air defence systems and 155mm artillery shells. They remain the most important goal for EU representatives. Excellent news there. Now, this news has been kicking around for a couple of days. Although the German government pledged to provide Ukraine with 400 MRATs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, like the Husky we saw, except not the Husky, in 2024 via German defence company FFG, delays have occurred due to licence restrictions on US exports to Germany and certification issues regarding mine protection. The number that will be delivered in 2024 has been reduced to 100 now instead of 400. Now, Germany's getting a lot of hassle for this, I think, but it's not, as far as I can work out, it's not a German problem. It's the export. So I presume it's an American problem issue that is causing this. And I think that was said by a French aide to Ukraine said something about this. So German aide to Ukraine says, according to a Bild report confirmed by the German Ministry of Defence, the 100 MRAPs promised to Ukraine in March are FFG MRAPs. So these ones, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. They are in contrast to the 66 FFG APCs, armoured personnel carriers, delivered to date. The new vehicles will be fitted with Stanag 4569 level 2 A and B mine protection, 6 kilogram explosive blast anywhere under the vehicle. However, according to information from Bild, this has not yet been certified. The German Ministry of Defence is said to be planning to deliver a total of 400 FFG MRAPs to Ukraine and has concluded a contract worth 315 million euros. If this is true, we can therefore expect further announcements in the future. According to the information from Bild, the delivery of the 100 FFG MRAPs announced in March is to begin in June 2024 and will be completed this year. So I don't know who is actually responsible for the delay. I'd say I'm presuming it's the US because that's what someone else said, but although I can't find where they've actually subsequently said that. Nonetheless, this is French aid to Ukraine. So the problem is due to export restrictions from the US to Germany, and that's still Germany's fault for most of your comments. So this is what he's saying in reply to other people who've been criticising Germany. Either I've misread something or some of you need therapy. Anyway, I don't know the exact details, but unfortunately those have been delayed, but it would be great when they get there. German Federal Foreign Office has financed at least 2 GCS-200 demining machines for the Danish Refugee Council in Ukraine for demining work in the Mykolaiv Oblast. One GCS-200 has already been delivered, while another one is expected to be delivered this month. Great stuff. Thank you, Germany, for helping to sort that out. And Denmark, of course, for no doubt the financing thereof. And then the Ukrainian president hopes to discuss with Emmanuel Macron, says French aid to Ukraine, the possibility of French planes protecting its airspace, following the French army's participation in the interception of missiles in the skies over Israel. Wow. So, quote, if French planes with French pilots can protect the airspace of Israel, why couldn't French planes protect the airspace of Ukraine? But in any case, such initiatives must come from someone who approves of such decisions. Emmanuel discussed many issues with me, but we did not finalise these points. He promised to come to Kiev, and I think we will have the opportunity to have this discussion. Of course, that would be brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Could be seen as escalatory, I look forward to seeing what the outcome to that will be. I have a feeling French planes are now on the agenda for a kind of medium-term air force provision for Ukraine, because initially, if you remember, it was like, what planes are they going to get? What planes are they going to get? It's going to either be the F-16, the Eurofighter Typhoon, or the Gripen, right? And that's what everyone was talking about. Yeah, then French Mirage basically were then thrown in, but then the Yuri Ihnat said, who's a spokesperson for the Air Force, said at the time, we can't really have that many planes on our books, so we're only going to look at two things really. And the idea was it's either F-16s and second choice would be Gripens. First choice probably would have been Gripens, as it being a kind of a better plane for the job than the F-16. It's just there's not many of them. And so it'll be easier to get F-16s, and you get a lot more support from a lot more countries, so they went for F-16s. Then Emmanuel Macron sort of changed his view on everything, then had a bunch of meetings, and part of which was trying to get, I would have thought, French military industrial concerns at the top of the list for orders from Ukraine, and also kind of advertising their wares or offloading older airframes, etc. So you had a couple of variants of the Mirage 2000 that were suddenly then being talked about. And I think even Macron, in that half an hour televised discussion with those two journalists, I think he even mentioned that then, if I remember correctly. So the French airframes, I think, are on the cards, but at what stage, I don't know. I think, of course, with any nation, your military industrial concern is going to be any company, like, for example, Saab with the Gripen, is going to be like, of course we want Ukraine to have our airplane. Like, we think it's brilliant. That's why we designed them and we're making it to make money by selling this brilliant bit of kit to as many people as possible. Not as many people have bought it as we would have liked. So if Sweden want to give that or buy them off us to give to Ukraine, we're cool with that, because that's going to advertise our stuff. And then we're also just going to sell more to Ukraine directly, or backfilling to Sweden, or whatever the situation is. We're going to sell more stuff. That's why we exist. Literally why we're here. And so any defense corporation is going to want their country to be arguing on their behalf to provide their kit to Ukraine. So that is definitely what the French exporters will want. Right. It's just a kind of by the by, but interesting. It's a Su-25 attack aircraft, so Sukhoi 25, an older Soviet era plane, but when you don't have many planes, the Ukrainian Air Force doesn't have many planes. They need to get them from wherever they can, especially Soviet era ones. So we've had MiG-29s, old MiG-29s being taken from Slovakia, and also Poland as well, was Su-25 aircraft donated by Macedonia in service with the Air Force of Ukraine. They were renovated and modernized. So that's brilliant stuff there. And here we have the Wild Hornets group. I might see if I can interview the guy from Wild Hornets. The Wild Hornets first-person view group has created smart FPV drones that are able to identify targets by itself, lock onto it, and even able to dodge objects. The drone is fully made out of Ukrainian parts. So not only is this brilliant because it's indigenously designed and created, and that's good for economic reasons, but it means that if you need to, you can use it in Russia. There's no problem about where these get used, but also the idea that it looks that it can employ artificial intelligence to do what it does. So really good news there. Then we come on to a bit of Russia. So the next meeting, oh no, not yet, sorry, Russia after this. So the next meeting, the Ramstein contact group, is to take place on April the 26th. That's only 3 days away. That's absolutely brilliant. And you're going to have the US aid hopefully sorted by then. You've got other countries are still coming online with their aid too. This was stated by the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands, Kajsa Ollongren. She added that the Netherlands is currently participating in a number of initiatives proposed by partners, in particular the Czech one on the purchase of ammunition for Ukraine and the German one on strengthening Ukrainian air defences. So I think things are moving in the right direction. Okay, problem. Hungary will block the EU's allocation of $2 billion or euros, in military aid to Ukraine until it receives guarantees that Hungarian companies won't be included on the Ukrainian blacklist, said Minister of Foreign Affairs and External Economic Relations Peter Szijjártó. Who knows what will happen with that, whether they will have to compromise, the Europeans, that will be the EU. Of course, Hungary is going to want to argue on behalf of its own economic concerns. But then you've got the moral component there, which is those economic concerns are being blacklisted for a reason. And of course, Hungary doesn't really care about that because it's got one foot in each backyard, hasn't it? So as Hungary straddles that fence. Right, and just last thing here, this is the Russian Blyat Mobile 3.0, the total tank. But upgrades have been made to this, and that includes a full enclosure at the back. So there were gaps at the back, if you remember. You could, in principle, fly drones into there to explode inside. That prevents drones from flying into the shell. And what appears to be 2 removable panels, one on each side, to allow for loading and discharging passengers, fueling, reloading, and maintaining the vehicle. So they have been adapting this, and it appears to be doing a job. It hasn't yet been blown up by the looks of it, but there you go. Anyway, that's a military aid video for you. Hopefully it was interesting and had substantial information for you. If you appreciated it, please like, subscribe and share. Always do appreciate that. And if you are subscribed to the channel, make sure when you have the drop down menu on the next to the bell that you select all rather than personalize. You want to select all, and then that means you'll get notified of all the many videos I do, if indeed you want to be notified about them. Who wouldn't? Thanks so much for your support. Take care. Speak to you soon. And thank you to all the members who are obviously legends.